Hello friends, Big J here, bringing you Heroes of the Week Episode 1. This is essentially going to be a series where I take a look at the most overrated hero for that particular week, most underrated hero for that week, and then the up-and-coming hero that's stomping pubs that week. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Our up-and-coming hero for this week is Ursa. When the patch first dropped, I had some theories on whether or not Ursa was going to be very strong, and I was convinced that he would be essentially broken, just because they changed the movement speed on Ursa in the previous patch before this one, and he got a huge win rate increase. And they increased it only by 5. So that just goes to show like how much movement speed can really benefit this hero. So when they increased it by 15, I was pretty sure that he'd be incredibly strong. And now that we have some statistics to actually back this up, I am 100% sure of it. And I think a lot of other people are as well. A lot of professional players are picking this hero in pubs and completely obliterating with it. In fact, it has a 60% win rate in high-rated pubs on the Dota 2 Pro Tracker. So the reason that I think this hero is very strong in pubs is because, of course, he has this increased movement speed, which allows him to essentially just run people down in the lane, in particular in side lanes, and get a bunch of free hits on people, free harass with the Fury swipes, and it's just very hard to lane against an Ursa. So for this reason, he can be played as an offlaner, which a lot of offlaners are picking this hero in pubs, and then in competitive, we see this hero is getting picked a lot as a kind of just like super strong laning carry. And I don't think a lot of people are playing it as 4, but when Ursa was strong before, near the end of the patch, people started experimenting with 4 Ursa, and it was going very, very well. And I think that with the increased movement speed, 4 Ursa is great because you could run around with like an Orb of Venom and destroy people. I think that's an underrated element to this hero. But essentially, with this increased movement speed, this solves the problem for Ursa of his kite ability, both in the laning phase, as we can see from this replay, he's very good at laning, and then also in fights. Like if Ursa is slowed in a fight, he can still catch up to people now. If he's stunned or he gets rooted, he can close the gap with his movement speed without a blink dagger, and then get his Earth Shock off and then kill somebody. So there's not going to be those fights where Ursa just goes in a little too early, or he gets hit by a stun, and then he's just walking around and hitting nobody. Like, he's going to get hits off on people. Alternatively, in a fight, you can also, like, use your increased movement speed to run to cover if you do overcommit, get into cover, and then blink back in and kill somebody. Like, there's way more options in the current patch with the current movement speed that Ursa has in terms of not getting kited in fights. And another problem that the increased movement speed alleviates for Ursa was, there was a huge problem for Ursa, but now it's not a problem, and that's the fact that essentially there was this grace period after the laning phase where offlane or even carry Ursa probably wouldn't have a blink dagger, especially if you go for a morbid mask, which is very good for soloing Roche and just fighting in general. So you'd have this period where you don't have a blink dagger, but the laning phase has ended and people are like 5-manning and fighting, and it's much harder to kill anybody without that blink. But now, because he can just pick up some phase boots, maybe drums, maybe morbid mask, and have like 400 and something movement speed, especially with the phase buff, he doesn't actually need the blink dagger to continue fighting after the laning phase. And before, people would almost always essentially hard farm the blink. And now you have the option to not do that and not be completely fucking useless. So this hero basically just feels really good to play, and it looks great every single time that I see it. In high-rated pubs that I've watched recently, like you can watch Seb plays this a lot on the offlane role, it's not uncommon to see pro players getting 20 kills on the hero consistently every time they play it. Our overrated hero for this week is Grimstroke, and I was going to say at the start of this, I don't want to trigger any Grimstroke players by putting this in here, but if you've been playing Grimstroke for the last 2 months, then yeah, you know, be triggered. I don't care. I'm so sick of this hero, but I think that this hero is not actually that bad. I do want to start off by saying that I think that he is overrated. There's a big difference. He offers a lot of utility, he offers a lot of disable, and he offers a decent amount of damage in a game, and that's especially true in a dual lane setting. But with that being said, the meta has still been trending away from a dual lane meta as of the Chongqing Major and the Dream League qualifiers, which just finished. So now games are a mix of dual lanes, solo off lanes with roamers, and tri lanes with a solo offlaner in particular, with aggro tri lanes, and then the offlaner goes into the safe lane. And this is where Grimstroke begins losing a lot of his potency as a hero. He's just not particularly great against a tri-lane when compared with something like an Undying, who can steal strength from all 3 heroes in the lane and just completely decimate an aggro tri, or as a roamer when compared with something like an Earth Spirit, who can just gap close on the mid lane instantaneously and stun them in a fraction of a second, all from out of vision. He has to walk up and use his little ink swell. It's just not an effective way to gank the mid lane or even a side lane. Essentially, Grimstroke isn't exactly weak because he's bad, despite the fact that he has received some pretty hefty nerfs in the previous patches due to him being very strong when he got added to the game. But he's more so weak because of the meta shifting away from his preferred playstyle, and with the nerfs that have come since this hero's inception, it's becoming less and less worth sacrificing your lanes potentially if it's not a traditional like 2-1-2 laning setup to have this hero around, because the spells are just worse than they used to be. And in the recent Dream League qualifiers, Grimstroke was picked over 100 times and had an atrocious 34% win rate. This is why I consider him overrated. He's still the 8th most picked hero in competitive, despite having a very bad win rate. I think that people are still in a bit of a state of shock from how strong this hero was when he first got added, that they basically, it essentially hasn't set in that he's not as amazing as people think. Our underrated hero for this week is Lycan, and the reason that I'm calling Lycan underrated, despite his win rate being very high across all MMR brackets on Dota buff, is just because Lycan's win rate is always very high across all MMR brackets on Dota buff, and my theory on this is that Lycan is a niche pick that is very good at winning pubs, so it's mainly specialty Lycan players that are driving the win rate up in patches where Lycan isn't actually good and everybody else is ignoring him. And this is the exact same thing that we see happen with Meepo when Meepo isn't particularly strong. But in this patch, Lycan has about 150 picks in the last week of high-rated pubs and is sitting at about a 66% win rate, which obviously is incredibly high. And for reference, Ursa has about a 60% win rate and about 400 picks. So essentially, Lycan is picked enough to have his win rate be statistically relevant, but isn't picked enough to be considered extremely high rated. And that's why, of course, he is underrated. So the reason why Lycan is incredibly strong right now is obviously because of the direct changes to him. They were just buffs. The increase in strength gain means that Lycan is naturally tankier and does more damage. The increase to movement speed means that Lycan's laning is stronger because you don't have the ultimate in the lane, and he farms faster because you don't use the ultimate to farm. It doesn't affect his fighting, however, mostly because you would essentially just fight around the ultimate, and the ultimate gives you 650 movement speed, but it's still a pretty big buff regardless of that. So the Wolves also got some pretty nice buffs, making them about 30% tankier despite nerfs to magic-resistant armor. Their effective HP went up by about 30%, and the Howl HP regen was almost doubled at the max level, and Howl was already good, giving armor and attack speed. However, in my opinion, some of the not-so-obvious changes to the game actually make Lycan a lot stronger in this patch than he was in the previous ones. So number one, Vlad's was nerfed. So Vlad's builders can no longer go for the very overpowered Bassi plus headdress in the early game. That was one of the best combos for offlaners because it essentially makes you a walking fountain. And the reason that people don't go for this anymore is because the headdress no longer contributes to Vlad's. Lycan, however, is a natural Vlad's and Helm of Dawn builder, so headdress plus Bassi is still on the table for him. Number two, stat items got nerfed because heroes no longer receive 25% extra bonuses from their primary attributes, and that includes from items, but have a 15% extra primary stat gain. Every single hero got that. So Lycan never built into stat items, so it doesn't matter that stat items got nerfed to him. He essentially builds into aura items, so he straight up gains more stats from this change, but stat item builders got a 10% nerf to their stats. Number three, towers have less armor now, but more HP, and Lycan builds into minus armor, and the armor calculation has been changed, so essentially towers are a lot squishier. And Lycan has a shitload of persistent damage for towers, so he basically just demolishes them now, and split pushing is so strong on him. Thank you for watching. That's it for this video. But before you go, I would really appreciate it if you comment whether or not you like this video, or if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see in a video like this, just because Donnie and I basically realized that we've been doing videos like this more than once a week, and we may as well just kind of compile it all into one way more structured video that we can do every single week, as opposed to just like randomly these meta videos are popping up. It'll just be like a weekly thing on the same day every single week. So let me know if there's anything you want to see in these videos. I would greatly appreciate the feedback. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in another one.